Hello, everybody. My name is Gijsbert Stoet. I'm a professor of psychology. I'm the maker of PsyToolkit, and I'm also supervising students who need to present a poster in different courses, in different psychology courses. That's something that we have every year, and I just want to give some tips. It doesn't matter where you are. I know this is specifically important in the United Kingdom, but I'm sure you also have this in Germany or in the United States. Site Toolkit followers are, of course, around the world. So I'm going to give you general tips, and because I work in the United Kingdom, especially at psychology courses in the United Kingdom, this is hopefully really helpful. I have a lot of experience of giving students tips about these things and teaching them and helping them with them. And we do this every year. And I actually must say, this is one of the favorite things of my teaching, because it's really nice that when you have a student, they present them, you see the student talking, it's really from them. It's different than when you get a written piece of coursework, which is just a little bit less personal. So this is one of the opportunities where we have this one-to-one interaction with our students. I found it really nice. But so, okay, I'm going to teach you today a couple of things. So first of all, the aim of today's tutorial here on PsyToolkit is to get the best possible grades, the best possible grade for your poster, the best possible mark. We call this marks in the United Kingdom. And so I'm going to talk about the things that you need to attend. And also I will tell you what we look at when we give a mark to the student. So what are the elements we look at? Now, this can vary from university to university. So my first tip is, and I think this is really important, look at your course handbook. There will be information on what the expectations are. If there's a lecture that the course leader of the final, in the UK we call this the final year project or the dissertation project, look for that, go there, because before you even start thinking about it, make sure you understand what is expected from you, because I think that is sometimes you see that a student does something really well, they thought about it really well, but they haven't followed the instructions. And then we said, yeah, but on our list we need to mark this and this and this, but you didn't do that, for example. So you don't want to fall in that fall for that mistake that's easy to prevent. So first of all, make sure you follow the details. And also, if you have questions, always ask your course leader or your supervisor for tips. And if something is not clear, typically, so we as professors or as lecturers, as we call it in the United Kingdom, we're really happy to answer questions from the students. And so just come, say, well, how do I do this? If we can't give you an answer, or if we're not allowed to tell you that, then we will tell you as well. But we're always happy to help students. So one question you might have is actually, what actually is a poster? What is a poster? Because if you're a student, you might just not know that. But what you should know is a little bit about the background, and that is that in the world of research, right? So there are conferences. And at conferences, you have talks. They're often very short, maybe 15, 20 minutes. Sometimes there's one long talk, an hour. But there are always posters where researchers present really quickly in a couple of minutes the thing that they have been working on. So, and of course, it's not just in academia. In all sorts of work, if you have a job at an office or maybe in a hospital, it's always about presenting your ideas to teammates or to colleagues, and the poster is just a really efficient way to present your ideas in a nice quick way. So that's a bit the idea behind it. And why do we ask students to do this? That's also, I think, is good. I think for a couple of reasons. So one is that, of course, people say, well, this is just a generic skill that is not only helpful if you become a researcher, but also if you have any other job, because Creating a poster is something that might be asked of you almost everywhere where you work. And I would say there are two basic skills that universities want to assess, what we call assess, right? What we want to measure here from our students, and that's one: are students able to verbally present their ideas, which actually is really nice because they're not that, depending on where you study, but certainly I would say in the United Kingdom, there are not many verbal sort of like exams or coursework, but this is one where you're sort of like talk, and what you talk about, that's where you get your mark for. So that's one. And it's generally about so it's about showing your ability to communicate and talk about your ideas. And the other thing is the ability to also create this poster, and communicate your ideas in sort of like in a very specific way, because you don't have many words like you have in an essay or in a chapter or in your thesis. Here it's about not having too much text. Often less is more. Sometimes you see a poster crammed full of text, and the letters, then if you stand from a distance, nobody is going to stand there for an hour to read at all. So you need to have a perfect balance. And it's not just about text, it needs to look exciting, that people come to your poster and not to another poster, right? Because if you're at a conference, there will be lots of posters to look at. So, okay, so that's sort of like about the why. And another thing that I should start with is what I have seen over the past years, understandably, is that lots of students are really nervous when they're standing in front of their poster. And at the end of this talk, I also will tell you a little bit what you can do to prevent being nervous about presenting your poster. And that's really important, because I can tell you there are students who are capable, but at that moment they sort of like freeze or become really nervous. And that is understandable, but that is also, of course, then a barrier to give a good presentation. So how can you do that? Well, if you want to know how to do that, watch this video to the end and I will tell you and talk you through. But first of all, I'm going to talk a little bit on, and I'm here in the corner of your screen, and I'm having my software here. I'm first going to say a little bit about, well, how to start. If I would start, rather than starting straight with the poster itself, I would start with the ideas, sort of like for myself in bullet points, so that I have a starting point and print it out or write it down on a piece of paper and say, okay, these are the sort of elements that I want to have in there. And I'm going to talk about that. So I'm going to have I use something like, I write always write with LibreOffice, which you can download for free. Is great software, similar to Microsoft Word, but except that it is free, and I like the interface, so I work with that. But the idea is here. Okay, so what we do. So I'm going to start now with my ideas. I write just my ideas for my poster. And this is not a poster, right? This is not my poster. You get me? So I should make the font a little bit bigger, because I realized that if you watch this on, okay, so that's where you start with, yeah. So you write that for yourself. You write this for yourself. This is not your poster, right? And then what elements do you have in a poster? Well, I would say, first of all, you have a catchy title, right? So you need to have a title, and this is actually quite important, because the title is the big text at the top. And it should not be too long. It should, it can be even something funny and short, I think, for a poster. Again, sometimes you get instructions on how to do it. But say, imagine you do a poster on something that you might study as a psychology student. For example, well, say for example you look at gender differences in the Stroop effect, which is, the Stroop effect, of course, is a cognitive task that you can do here on SciToolkit. And maybe you found out that maybe men and women perform equally well, or maybe there's some slight gender differences. Then you have a simple title, such as Gender Differences in the Stroop Task. Or maybe you can make something fun out of that. are women really better in the Stroop task or something like, but with a funny picture, so that you catch the attention of your audience, because ultimately it's about communication here. But so the title, if you find this difficult, what elements should be in the title? Well, so if, for example, a key concepts, right? So for example, if you work on the Stroop task, then Stroop tasks should be in it. Um, Maybe if so Stroop task. But if you do something, say, if you do a poster on, say, autism, then autism should at least be in the title. That seems to be sort of like an obvious thing. And typically, what people do is combine that concept with the independent or dependent variables, or maybe both, in your task. But if you have lots of variables, you can't mention them all in the title. So try to focus on the key thing. For example, if you do say a study on gender differences in the Stroop task, maybe you also have measured how familiar people are with a language, or maybe you have studied the age of participants. You can't all mention this unless it's a key thing that you study in your task. So look at the key things. But also I would say keep the title short, because with posters, you don't want to have too much text. At least that's my tip, because on a typical poster, and even if you have sort of like a poster presentation day for your course, people will see lots of posters. Now, there your supervisor has to look at it, but you also see that sometimes people who are not marking are walking around and they go to certain posters and, hey, that looks cool, or that looks interesting. So now that's interesting. But of course, for you, I would say think about this as well, right? So your main aim primarily is to get a good grade, also to have fun, of course, and to have this exercise, but also you want a good grade, right? So you want a good mark for your poster. And you do not need to worry that people don't come to your poster, but your supervisor might think about, would people go to this poster? The comments, they might say, oh, this is really well presented, right? So that's one of the things that we look at. But so think about the title, and you can already think about that here. So the second thing is your intro. Now you don't need to do, I would personally, for example, would I say introduction on a poster? I wouldn't say that, because an introduction, you have that in a book or in a long text, but not on a poster. I would say have some, for my intro, of course it is the introduction of the poster. It is because where people start to look at it, and later I will show you a poster and explain you how it works. But the third thing is I would probably call it something like, one good thing is just to call it a research question. What's your research question, or research questions? Right? So research question. Okay. So what could that be? Well, let's go back to our example about, say, gender differences in the Stroop task. The key question could be, maybe your hypothesis is, for example, that women are better in the Stroop task. Then it is actually very simple. Are women better in the Stroop task? So that can be, that's it. And then you need to sort of like write that on your poster. And in this case, because this would be a very clear and easy to understand research question, so you want to have that. And I would say, for example, on the poster later when we design it, that needs to be fairly big, so that people immediately know, oh, that's the question. So that's interesting. I want to look at this poster. Then what you also want in that, so what's the reason that you ask this question? Is there some research? Is there a theory that suggests that women are better at that? So, for example, I'm just, I don't remember all the details about the Stroop task and the theories about it, but maybe it's something where you could say, well, given that, we see sex differences or gender differences in language processing, maybe women are quicker in processing text and therefore have less of the Stroop interference that we see maybe in men. So that could be a hypothesis, and then therefore I predict that in my experiment women will show a smaller Stroop effect. And then Also explain, of course, you could do that here or in the methods. You need to have a picture of what the Stroop task look like and so on. So you can say, well, in my research question, I want my hypothesis, and in your sheet, right? This is your preparation sheet. So you can maybe do that with bullet points. All right, so that's and then these are my notes. And you can hear picture. Maybe you're thinking about it later. And then what's your next section? Well, the next section is the methods. That's very important. And I would have on my poster, I probably would have something like a methods section and have that title, that word methods. What's key here is, say, for example, if you do a cognitive psychological task, show the task, the task's, task timeline, in a diagram. That's quite important. Of course, what you need to know, how many participants did you have? Now, in the UK, what we often have is that at the time that students need to present a poster, they have only collected a certain number of participants. So you might say, well, Ari had 10 participants, but I'm planning to do 100 or something like that. That's totally fine, because what you're not judged here on, you're typically not judged on how well the study has gone or what you exactly found. You're really judged, I would say, on the presentation skills and the communication skills. That's the key thing that we look at as sort of like staff on how our students do. So how many participants though, or how many do you have planned to have? So if you did your study already, you would say how many did you have, or how many do you plan to have? That's there. Like materials, stimuli, right? So if you have any pictures used in your study, show them. This is actually quite nice, because here it comes down to communication. When you go through a poster as the audience, you start with the research question. Okay, if you understand the research question, then you go to the methods. I think it happens that you say, oh, I don't follow what the person who is presenting actually is talking about, and then you're sort of like lost, and then everything that comes after that is no longer understood, and you say, okay, well, goodbye, go to the next poster. So make sure that people understand it. I personally would say, if you're not sure, err on the side of simplicity rather than complexity. Unless you're presenting your poster to some people who know all the details about your research. Well, in this case, of course, it's your supervisor. They do. But typically, I would say, don't make it too complicated, because you might lose your flow speeching, because you might, how was that exactly, and so on. So then you go like there, and you can focus on the simple things, because a poster presentation is, I would say, at most 5 minutes, and at many universities they will time it, because your supervisor, he has not only, or she, of course, has not only to look at your poster, but also that of your, of other students. They might have to look at 10, 15 posters, and some people even more. So they go, okay, I have 5 minutes. So, when your supervisor comes, be ready there and then go straight in it, okay? And as I said, later I will talk about how you deal with being nervous, and I always feel really, really sorry for the students, but there are ways to deal with that. Now, of course, people will be kind on you, okay? So they're not, if you are nervous, people understand that, okay? They're not going to say, oh, that is bad, okay? I always feel very sympathetic for students. I feel sorry. I know, you don't do this every day, and if you're nervous and freezing, people will help you and support you with that. At the same time, there are other ways, I think, to try to not be nervous. So I'm going to give you some tips on that. So wait for that. Also, in between, if you like this video, why not subscribe to this channel? I have lots of tips about writing your dissertation as well here in a playlist. And please like this video. It's always good for this channel if you like SciToolkit videos. Now, so I'm still here on making the sheet, so I have the methods. So these are key things. But you also, by the way, so what sort of analysis will you use? Now, you don't need to say that you use SPSS or R. What would you say, for example, you can say, I used a 2x2 ANOVA or whatever, right? So something very typical or regression analysis or whatever. But it actually is good to say that here. I think you will get points for maybe saying that because, oh yeah, it's good that the student thought about that. But don't go into the details there. Just say, oh yeah, and I used a 2x2 ANOVA and I will show you the results, right? So again, don't put too much information on there because that can be distracting. All right, then the next section is very important as well, results. Now, I should say again, some students don't have their data yet. In that case, what you do, not at all universities, but I have seen this at different universities. What you do is you say, well, look, I haven't had my results, but this is what sort of like I think, having looked at some preliminary data, you might just say, well, look, we haven't collected data yet, but this is what it might look like, and I present it as if these are the data. That's fine. Ideally, you would have some data, but it's just not always possible because the time scale, and sometimes some you might have an issue with maybe your ethics application or data collection with you couldn't get your participants or there was some other issue, and that happens. And I don't think that that is necessarily a problem, depending on the university, right? So if that's at your university, make sure you have checked that with your supervisor or with the course leader, but it might be that they are totally happy with that because it's about communication here. So what should be in the results? Well, I always would say, well, descriptive statistics are nice, right? So descriptive statistics, so you have typically you have some descriptive statistics, where you, for example, say, well, on average, the Stroop effect in women was this and this, and in men it was that and that. And then typically it's nice, I think, and people will, if you have a mean response time, also show the standard deviation or the standard error, even in the descriptive statistics, because that shows that you know how to present data. And then you have what we call inferential statistics, and these are about analyzing the data using statistical methods to draw conclusions from whether for example whether there's a true sex difference or whether the effect is too small to be statistically significant. These two elements, they need to be in there almost no matter what study you do, unless you do a qualitative research project. And I would say that that's slightly different, but I'm going to actually show you some data that is sort of like partially qualitative, and that's fine too. So keep watching for my demonstration of sort of what a poster could look like. That's the results. Now, what I personally think is really nice in a results section is a figure. In this case, if you have data from men and women, have some sort of like a bar plot, have it in colors, make it look cool, because this is something that, this is the key part of what you did. A good table is okay, but I personally really like a figure, where you also show, I know how to make a figure, I know how to make it look good. Don't just copy and paste something from SPSS, I would say, but use some good software such as Inkscape or whatever you use to make it look good, and take time for that, because people will judge you on that. Sometimes what does a good figure look like? I will give you some examples. I mean, the one that I have actually doesn't have a figure like that in the results, but because it's a qualitative study, even so, if that's the case, have a picture of somebody smiling or something like that, or have a picture, also in your message, have a picture of the computer that you used for running the experiments on. Show stuff, because that makes it nice. Just text always looks boring, I would say. Right, okay, so in the results, so what did you find? Focus on important stuff, right? Focus on on the important stuff, the main stuff, because you can't show everything. That's also, you might have done lots of analyses, but choose what is important. That's part of communication, right? Select the things that you want to communicate. You can't do everything because you have only a few minutes. And then for the final bit, so that you make for your sheet, right, that you start with, okay, your discussion. Now, I wouldn't call it discussion personally for a poster. You have that in your thesis, right? You have that in your dissertation or in your paper or in your chapter, but you don't. I would say I wouldn't do that. Yeah, you could do it on a poster, but I like it better to have something. Yeah, discussion means it's going to be lengthy. It's going to be fairly long, and this is quick, right? So instead, I would do conclusions, or even main conclusions, and make that nice. What are the main things? And I would say, think about what did you find. Find maybe of the two main findings that you want to report, 2 or 3 main findings. Maybe I would say here, so maybe maybe restrict yourself to 2 or 3 main points. And sometimes, what are the implications, right? So not only what did you find, well, did this match predictions, hypotheses, and also what are the implications? Now, for example, for further research or for society as a whole. Now, you do sort of like a basic research project, like sex differences in the Stroop task, then I might say, well, maybe this hasn't been studied well, and one of my implications is that we need to do more research on this and this. So for also, I always think limitations are good to mention. You can have a separate section, maybe, but don't say I didn't have enough participants, because I find that is sort of like too easy. Might be true, but if you do that, your supervisor might think, okay, well, this is the easy way. I didn't have enough participants, or, but that I think it must be something more. Ideally, you want to have something more sophisticated, because then you show I really have thought about the things. So what could be? Well, maybe you might say, well, in my study, for example, I found that more. What we actually often see in this research, we had more female than male students, and we found that male students didn't do so well in our Stroop task. But it might partially be because, for example, the male sample sort of like, I really had to force my male friends to participate in the study, and they were not sampled in the same way as the female students were sampled. Something like that. Or you need to have something more sophisticated. I wouldn't go for the simple ones that everybody mentions, because, just try to think about it. I mean, for a poster, one limitation is more than enough, I personally would say, because, people know every study has limitations, right? So no study can be done perfectly. Maybe they can, but not this study. By the way, another nice thing to do, where you could say, well, this was a limitation, but if I had unlimited amounts of resources, I would do it like this. So what would you do better if you had, or how would you resolve that limitation? That's a good thing, because then again, you show you thought about it. And that's often what, of course, we look at in students. They have thought about it. They have thought beyond the basics. That's a nice thing. So how you get extra points, I would say. So that's your, like we said, we're going to make a basic sheet, right? So you print this out, and then you need to think, okay, what software am I going to use? Now, let's see first how I'm going to present this. Now, posters are always presented on a wall. They are hanging. And there are 2 ways of doing it. So one is where you just print out stuff on, just normal sheets of paper. Like in Europe we have A4, or in the US you have letter format, pages. and then you have a whole bunch of pages and you put them together. Now, at some universities, students are recommended to do that just to save cost, and because people say, well, look, because ultimately we're not judging you on having shiny, expensive paper from a print shop. Just do it simple. So that's one way. So you can do it on multiple sheets. Really, it doesn't matter, I think. It's also easier to carry around. But if you want to do the poster on a big sheet, yeah, often it's called A0 or A1, these really big sheets that you can roll out and hang up, there are a couple of tips that I have. First of all, check where you can print it out cheaply, because there are huge price differences between different printers. Maybe sometimes you might print it out for only for the tenner. At other places might be more. But if you think, okay, that's too expensive, don't do it, because I think ultimately you don't get extra points for doing that. At least it depends, right? So ask your supervisor about it. But if your supervisor says, no, it doesn't need to be on A1 or A0, just do it on multiple pages, that's fine. Ask them. But if they say, no, it really has to be super professional, needs to be on A1 or A0, then you know it for a fact. But make sure that you ask that question, because it's important. Even if they say you can do it on sheets, there are always going to be students who have it on an A1 or A0, and it might look slightly better. I've seen bad posters on big shiny paper, because ultimately it's about the content and what you put on it. So I wouldn't worry, personally, I wouldn't worry too much about it, but also would say, because this is not just a presentation for my students, it's for all the students in the whole world. So ask, right? Ask, always ask. But then if you are going to print it on one of these big things, look for the prices, because they vary. And sometimes you have cheaper types of paper, so it doesn't need to be on shiny paper, for example, and that can be cheaper. Just take then big paper, but do it cheaply. Sometimes your university might have a poster printer. If that's the case, ask if you can print it in the university. Sometimes many universities has print centers and so on, but it's every university has a different setup. So make sure that you have sorted that. And then, okay, say for example, let me say, actually, if you do it on multiple sheets, make sure that if you say a new text document, you need to go to your settings. Okay, so then you choose, make sure you get the format correct. And I had to look a little bit for this, because I don't often do this, but there is something, for example, in LibreOffice Writer, it's called page style, and you will have something similar in Word, where you have your format, whatever that is, right? That's A4 or letter if you're in the US, and then you will have something they call portrait or landscape. And landscape means just that it's white, right? So make sure that you have set that, and then then you have your page like that. And then I would say for my title, I might put the title on one page. Don't forget your name and institution, right? So that's always what should be there on there. Don't forget your name and institution. Like, say for example, the University of I don't know, the University of Glasgow. Or for a student presentation, I think you should not have co-authors unless it's a group presentation. Make sure you get that sorted, because if you present it, you would present it with your supervisor. And what I would do, out of politeness to my supervisor, I would say, look, I'm making my poster. Should I list you as a co-author? That's a very good thing to do, because then you show already in advance to your supervisor that you have thought about that idea. I think that's a good thing. But I would say, most likely your supervisor would, for this specific exercise, would say, yeah, you can maybe, or maybe no, because I'm judging you and it's really only your work. So that's just your name. Okay. Your institution typically will have a logo. Make sure the logo is on there. It looks much better. Again, I have a little picture and it makes it look nice. Okay. Right. Also, some universities have a default poster format. Now, I must say about it, you could use that, and it might work in your benefit. That you say, well, look, I used the university's default format. Some people might like that. On the other hand, I find these things often very plain and boring, and I don't think you would get extra point. And maybe somebody would say, "Oh, that's really good that the student has thought about that." But again, you might ask your supervisor in advance, "Do you want me to use the university template for posters, or should I design it myself?" And most likely, your supervisor will say, "Well, in this case, you design it yourself." Again, if you're not sure, ask your supervisor. That's a key advice. I've seen it many times that students just feel shy to ask these things, but don't feel shy. Ask your supervisor, right? So that's our job as as university staff. We help you, and there are no stupid questions. That's always what I try to communicate to my students. There are no stupid questions. Okay, now let's go on. So we have our sheet here now. You could use just Word or whatever you use, or Writer as LibreOffice Writer. Again, make sure you put your page to a 0, right? You would choose your word, and do that. You can use a nice drawing program. Again, you can use something like uh, but I personally, for example, I use Inkscape. But for these drawing programs, for example, Inkscape, only use that if you feel comfortable with working with that, because these types of software, it typically takes days to weeks to become good at it. So don't use software that you're not familiar with, or maybe at the beginning of the year, if you see this video at the beginning of the year, think, okay, I should learn some good presentation software like Inkscape. I use that, but you don't need to. I think you can do this perfectly well with something uh, Word, or alternatively, and maybe even better also. So there you can do this with for example, with PowerPoint. With PowerPoint you can make presentations. You can also make just one page. The quality of your poster reflects to some degree how good you can work with that software, because you sometimes see people use really poor fonts or something. Like, there are loads of fonts on computers. Choose a nice font, something that's readable. Install new fonts on your computer, because if you just do it, say for example, in a font like this, I don't like this that much. So what, for example, if I choose a different font, like I have so many. Now, you don't want to do it in this font, obviously, because that looks funny. But for example, a rounded font is very easy to read. Something like Arial Black is not, like nice thick letters, but that's a little bit of a matter of taste. But you install uh, extra fonts on your computer. Now said a lot. I think I've said enough about this stuff. What I want to go now to is, how do we actually uh, what about references, by the way? So at the bottom, do you need references? Well, I think it depends. Definitely don't have lots of references, because nobody is going to read these, really. I mean, I at least that's what I would say. People say, where does that come from? Where's that based from? Yeah, it can be nice. Maybe you have one or two key references if that's important to you. If they tell you you have to have references on there, I think one reference is fine, two references is fine, three references. Then you start. Yeah, that's more than five references would be too much, because it takes up important space that you can have something else. So personally, I'm not a big fan of references on posters, uh, because it's a presentation, right? So if people say, well, where does it come from? You say, well, I'm happy to send you an email with the references. That's how it works. Also, um, but there, ask your supervisor. Yeah, do I need to have references? Always good to ask, right? So it's never. I've said it many times. Key to success at university, I think, is asking questions of things you're not sure about. Um, Right. Okay. So what do supervisors actually look for? Now, what they typically do is, so when your poster is ready, they will have some sort of like a list given by the university, some sort of like form to say, well, look at these, and you can give points for these different things. Now, what sort of things do you think are on there? Well, they will look at the different elements that could be titled, like in the introduction, and they will look at things that, did you present it well? Was it presented clearly on the poster what the question was? Something like in the methods. Is the material properly shown? Did they report how many participants and maybe some demographics of the participants? Maybe something about the recruitment. They might have a checklist. It depends. I think some will do it holistically, just give a mark, but they typically will have some sort of like a checklist. And I'm looking at a checklist. I just thought, well, this is, if I would have to make a checklist, this should be on it. So, for example, the results section, you need, did the students show and tell about what they found? Was it well presented? Did they have a nice figure, or a nice table? And also overall, there will be probably some like an aesthetic, maybe judgment. So overall, how cool did this, or how good, right? So how good did it look? Was it appealing? Was it visually appealing? Is it structured well, right? And with structure, we mean, do you have these building blocks like, basically question, methods, results, conclusion, or whatever the structure is, and that might be then combined, but is it both visually and verbally presented? And also something about how well did you engage with your audience? Don't read something from a piece of paper. Don't read something that you printed out and then that's the worst thing for a poster presentation. Well, it's maybe not the worst thing that you can do, but don't do that. Okay, and I've said many times how to stay calm for that. Well, there are a couple of things for that. So sometimes if you are easily nervous, you probably all know this. On the one hand, you might say, well, I had to drink some coffee to be feeling really awake. But coffee and caffeine drinks can make you nervous and a little bit anxious as well. So I personally would like a week in advance of the poster already. If you drink a lot of coffee, of course, and you don't drink coffee on that day, then you might have withdrawal effects and not feel very fit. So that's not a good idea. But just maybe try to drink a little bit less coffee already in the week advance of your poster, so that you're not dependent on caffeine, which can make you additionally nervous. So that's one thing. Another thing is to practice. And that, you may say, yeah, but that's, you need to practice for different people. So often you will have peers, other students. You can say, well, I'm going to do my presentation as if I'm in that room, so I'm going to hang it up and I'm going to present it. You can also just present it yourself in your room and record yourself and then look at the recording and how well did you do. But practice, practice, practice. Maybe 100 times. That's maybe a lot, but definitely 20 times, I would say. At the very least, 20 times. Go through it all from the beginning to the end. So that means that even if you're nervous, right, it's just in there. Now you might still freeze if that's what happens. You could, if you are totally frozen, right? So what do you do then? Your supervisor stands in front of you with his and so Lisa, so let's go through your poster. I'm ready. If you feel totally frozen and so nervous that you can't do it at the moment, you can say, well, sorry, I need to apologize. At this moment, I feel so frozen. Would it be okay to do, maybe you can do another student first, or I just need to sort of like, I feel frozen, I can't do it. That, I think, would be a reasonable question, if that, unless they do it in a very funny timed way. So don't feel shy. Take a deep breath, do some relaxation things as well. And I would also say, you can tell your supervisor, like, look, I've never done this before, I've practiced really well, but I'm so nervous, I can't help it, I can't control my body. So that the supervisor can take that into account, and they probably already have established a relation with you, so they know normally you're not so nervous, you're only today. I have had students who were really, really good and were really nervous. But also, the nice thing is often that, yeah, they warm up then, right? So the first 30 seconds you're really nervous, but then then you start talking. And I think, practice in maybe now that I'm thinking of it, maybe you could even practice presenting something else to your supervisor, maybe in the period before, where you say to your supervisor, can we do a practice run? Not on the poster, of course, because the supervisor would never do that. No, no, I'm going to mark you there and then. But what about you do a short presentation on something else? Maybe with your supervisor, if they have time for that, or with another teacher, or with somebody in the university that you would make you nervous, because it might be. Or here's an idea. What about you don't ask your friend that you know really well, but you ask somebody in your, what about you students all get together and say, well, I want to be buddied up with somebody who I do not know or even like. Necessarily. Like, yeah, there are people that I never click with that person. But I'm going to ask that person to watch me doing my poster, and I will do it for that person. Because then you might be in sort of like a position where you feel somewhat more nervous. And you know, well, in psychology at least, your supervisors, they will generally say, all staff members, they understand that, because we have seen that before. We know it happens, and we don't blame you for it, right? So we feel compassion and sympathy for that, because we know it's hard. It's hard to do this. It's always hard for everybody. I just said it before. I want now to show you a poster and how I would present it. So I show here, so I'm here. Now I need to say I made this poster a couple of years ago. So the topic is sort of like psychological. It is about, it was for a diabetes conference where I had done a survey with people who have diabetes and who have an implantable or like sort of a skin glucose sensor, which gives glucose values for people with diabetes. Is really handy, and lots of people also who are on some sort of like a diet find it interesting to know what their blood glucose is. So that's the topic. So what did I do here? Well, I I did this, so I showed where I am. So at the University of Essex, my email. So here, what I said before. So in terms of title, it's sort of like how people really experience the Freestyle Libre sensor. Now this is sort of like it was qualitative in the sense that there were lots of open answers. I have the logo of the university and then my name and a way how people can contact me. This is very right important, right? So now, in terms of the layout, if you look at it, so on here I had sort of like the headers, but I had arranged it in a way that I thought was sort of like nice. At the bottom, I had sort of like a little bit of curve. I made this all with Inkscape, by the way. And then I have my research questions, my methods, the findings, and then I have like sort of like had it made with different fonts, conclusions, and limitations. Now, actually, the one that I said, well, don't say this. It is an easy one. Well, here, this was probably, I would say, one of the main limitations for this study, because I think it was hard to generalize. Now, before I said don't do it, and I did it here myself. See, sometimes it's easy to give advice. If students do this and have no other limitations, I find it's relatively easy to do it. For this specific one, actually, I think this was a major limitation. But given that with an online questionnaire, you expect lots of more people to participate. Now, let me present this as if I'm a student. So how would I go about it? Well, it has to be short, right? So I say, okay, hello. Now, by the way, people already have seen the title, so I don't need to read out the title. Yeah, hi. So it's oh hello. Well, thanks for coming to my poster. This poster is really about the Freestyle Libre sensor, and my research question was what patients think of the Libre sensor and of the Libre sensor website. And another question is what educators can do to support their patients better. given the answer. So I wanted to figure out, if we know if we know what people who have diabetes think about using this sensor, we can, you know, educate people better to work with this device, and it will be easier for, something like that, right? So that's my research question. And then, okay, so how did I work? Well, I had an online questionnaire, so I ran it, in 2022, and I had around 60 questions. So some were about demographics, some were about like whether people liked using the sensor or whether maybe it was painful to insert and so on. Altogether, I had only 71 people participating, and here you see in my figure the distribution of ages and genders. And the mean estimated A1C, the median estimated A1C blood value was 6.8%. Now, what did I find? I found that that it didn't matter. The A1C value did not relate to how long people had used it, and that's actually interesting because in the literature it's often said that people who use the Libre sensor, their A1C value goes down. But in this study, I didn't see a relationship between these things. Also, in terms of this sort of like this cohort, these people did not feel massively overwhelmed with their diabetes. Now that might actually be because they had a sensor. I cannot determine that for sure whether that was because of the sensor or that it was just because the way the recruitment worked. I asked people what they found the most challenging or the worst thing about the sensor, and 20% of the participants said that it had a failure rate, so that it often failed to give the glucose values to their phone, and they also reported that they had unreliable readings. Now, I made a difference between what people found good and found bad about the sensor, and here you can see some, read it for yourself once, you can see it. But a good example is that people said it makes a diabetic's life a lot easier, but at the same time, people worried about the sensor not working. Okay. Now, overall, my conclusions are that although this device has obvious advantages that you know from the literature, there are actually quite a number of problems that people experience with these sensors that the diabetes educators should take into account. For example, that there's a relatively high failure rate, and that people didn't know how to recycle the sensor. So, well, that's my study. I mean, one of the major limitations, of course, that I didn't have so many participants. I'm still planning to get more participants, I could say, if that's the case. And if you found it interesting, you want to know more, feel free to send me an email. Now, okay, so that's a poster on a topic that is sort of like psychological. The idea here is, so why is this a good poster? Well, obviously I made it myself, so it's easy to say. I always, everybody finds their own work good. But so if I go to my checklist of how I mark this, in terms what I said before, that there is an introduction. What was missing here, though, where you could say where the student failed if I would have been a student, what is the supportive theory or behind the idea behind it, and why was there not a hypothesis? Now you could say, well, this is qualitative research, therefore there is no hypothesis. But if this would not be qualitative, you could still have said, well, what is the word behind it? What did we already know? Now, you don't have a lot of time in these presentations to go in all the details. You could say, well, this is so important and obvious. The question is so important and obvious that people would not ask it. But ideally, you would say, well, maybe one sentence would have probably already added a little bit. So if I would have said so you could have said, for example, currently there's almost no research on the patient experience with these devices. So I cannot even create expectations or hypotheses because we simply don't know. We need to start with this study. Something like that would have been better. Then the methods, I think that was clear, but what would have been better, maybe I would say there was not a lot of space for it. You could argue it's nice that there's a figure in it, but maybe one or two example questions would probably have been scored slightly better, because what were these questions then? What is this questionnaire exactly? Okay, you said what it measured, but what exactly? Could you give me an example of a good question? That would maybe not bad. That would not have been bad. Now, then I would have to take something else out, right? Because you don't. There's already a lot of stuff in here. The results, I would say. Well, what did you find? So that's in there clearly. The student, no, here the presenter has focused on uh, key points, and it's nicely done, right, with positive points and negative points. So I think that's really where, that's sort of like nice with smiley face and here frowny face, sort of like that. That can be actually, that's quite nice, stands out. So also here a sensor, and here the pictures, they make it a little bit more alive. So I think that's good. If you would have had a hypothesis, also it would have been good if you might have linked it here to the result, to the hypothesis, or maybe even better in the conclusions. But then, so now the conclusions, was there a clear conclusion? Yeah, I think so. There was there. Um, Overall, what does it look like? Well, I think this personally, okay, I made it. I thought it was, I looked pretty good. I thought I was at that conference, and I thought it was one of the really good looking posters. I put a lot of time in that. I must say that. Even though it looks simple, I still I thought a lot about it. How do I do this? I made these yellow boxes with a little arrow, and then I thought about what color scheme do I use, and I thought yellow on black. That's quite nice. How was the presentation? Well, the presentation was. Well, you can judge it yourself. Was it clear? Was it engaging? That you judge me. Okay, so but that's we have a list of things as supervisors that we look at. So I hope this helped. I hope that this gives you a starting point. And now, of course, it's up to you to start working on your poster. Also, try to see how much time you have. If you still have months up to your poster, yeah, then then it's a good time to start working maybe on making sure that you make a draft poster with the software so that you have time to start again. Because one of the key things is being able to work well with the software, and also I would say make sure you have your poster ready at least 10 days, no, I don't know, maybe 10 days before you give your poster presentation to your supervisor. Have sort of like a draft version ready that you can present to fellow students, to your family members, maybe to friends, and so on. And as I said, if you easily freeze in these sort of events, make sure that you practice, including with real people, and ideally with real people you don't know very well, because it's with those people that you then will freeze. Okay, good luck with your poster preparation. I hope you get a really good grade. If you found this video helpful, or if you have questions, leave a comment below the video. And for really important, if you have watched all the time until here, don't forget to like and subscribe to the SciToolkit channel. And I hope to see you soon again for another video. Bye now.